Good day, everybody. My name is Danny Kambel. I am the Assistant Athletic Director for Sports Communications here at Spartanburg Methodist. We're excited to have for you today a webinar, which is a collaboration between the College Sports Communicators, CSC, and the NAIA-SIDA. We are pleased to offer this session on a baseball softball stats refresher course. I know in many parts of the country and Canada as well, the weather may not look like it's baseball, softball weather. Here at Spartanburg Methodist, we'll kick off our season and throw out our first pitch, hopefully next Friday. So not sure it's weather conducive to baseball, softball, but I think as good SIDs, we all like to be prepared for our upcoming season. So we're excited for today's webinar. So we welcome our colleagues from CSC and our corporate partner, PrestoSports, as presenters today. We are here to offer our thoughts and expertise on handling baseball and softball statistics. Today, we are pre-recording this webinar, and it will be offered to all who work in college athletics free of charge. Please invite your fellow CSC colleagues and others to join in and watch today's webinar. We've got lots to get to cover, and we'll get started. And now here are today's guest panelists, and we'll allow them to each introduce themselves, and we'll get started. Denny?
Denny Grubb. I live in Lewiston, Idaho. I cover Lewis Clark State College baseball and the NAIA World Series.
Our next panelist will ask Adam.
Good afternoon. I'm Adam Stanek. I'm the Sports Information Director at Mid-America Christian University. I've statted a lot of Sooner Athletic Conference tournament softball games, NAIA tournament softball games, as well as a lot of the local tournaments down here in sort of the Oklahoma City, Dallas areas.
Okay. And then from our partners at PrestoSports, we've got a pair of their partners, and we'll let them introduce themselves. So Sean, go ahead and lead it off.
Good afternoon. My name is Sean Offerdahl. I'm an education specialist here at PrestoSports. I do also come from college athletics background. I've worked as an SID at a couple different NCAA schools.
My name is McCutcheon. I am a project manager with our implementation team here at PrestoSports. Prior to joining Presto, I was a sports information director for 10 years at 3 different institutions, including 2 members of the NAIA. And I've been with PrestoSports for just about 2.5 years now.
As our colleagues from Presto will be with us, they'll be talking more about getting the product ready rather than what's going on with the actual product this afternoon. So gentlemen, thanks for joining us. So we'll let Adam kind of throw out the first pitch and talk a little bit about softball.
Sure thing. Obviously, one of the big things with softball that some common mistakes I often see with softball statting, and this happens a lot with baseball too, is mostly on sacrifice bunts and sacrifice flies. A lot of times you can get a little bit mistaken on for like a sacrifice fly. Do you enter SAC as an SAC or SF? If it's a sacrifice bunt, when you're entering into Presto, you want to make sure you enter the putouts and then space SAC. When it's a sacrifice fly, I often see SAC put as an SAC, but it should be SF. And it's important to really make the correct determination on that because obviously they are 2 different statistical categories, and we don't want sacrifice flies going towards sac bunts and the opposite. So another thing to kind of keep an eye on with that sort of thing as well is if there's ever any errors in those scenarios, like let's say a girl lays down a sac bunt, but fielder completely has a terrible throw to first or bobbles it or whatever it may be. I often see just the error entered on the play, but you do need to also make sure you're entering the sac on that as well, even if there's an error that batter is still trying to sacrifice them to advance the runner. So it is important to make sure you're still entering the SAC if they're trying to advance a runner, even if there's an error on the play. Obviously, one of the big things is determining earned and unearned runs. Just because there's an error that happens in an inning doesn't mean that every run that happens after that error is unearned. It's really situational. You need to be determining where the runner would have been or would the runner have scored if the error didn't happen. So make sure when you are trying to determine between earned and unearned runs, take in the full factor of the inning on what a certain base runner that did score would have, where she would have been if the error didn't happen. Like for example, let's say runner on second, 1 out. Let's say shortstop misplayed a grounder, that runner advanced to third, and then there was a single, like a bloop single to like maybe like it was like a little pop up to kind of like the second base area, and then a ground out where the runner would have scored. Obviously, the runner at second, let's say she, advanced to third on the ground out and would have advanced home on the hit, like she would have scored regardless of the error. So that's one situation where you may consider an earned run instead of an unearned run, even though there was an error in the inning. Another thing to kind of keep an eye on, and I know Denny will probably maybe talk about this a little bit, like determining RBIs, because this probably happens a little bit more in baseball than it does softball. Whenever there is a double play, and let's say there's a runner at third and they score on the double play, the batter does not get credit for an RBI on that. If there's just like, let's say a fielder's choice at second and they didn't get the out at first, the batter still gets an RBI, but if it's a double play, batter does not get credit for an RBI in that situation. One of the more common things in softball that I see is whenever a runner gets called for leaving early with a base runner at first, obviously you've probably seen some situations, and maybe you didn't catch the umpire calling it, where the runner at first takes off. She easily gets into second, like no tag or anything, but the umpire still signals out. I've seen a lot of statters enter this as like a 2-6 caught stealing, but you need to make sure you're keeping an eye on the umpire, because a lot of times what those situations are is the runner left early, and that does not get contributed as a caught stealing in Presto. So what you need to enter is generally what I put is the closest fielder. So I put 3 space RLE instead of 2-6 caught stealing. That way that runner does not get attributed, a caught stealing in her stats. It's just she was called for leaving the base early. One of the more common things with softball, with it being a smaller field, it can be a little bit harder to determine whether a play can be, it should have been a hit or an error. One of the easiest things I like to do when it comes to softball statting is taking the full play into discretion. A lot of times, like with a fast base runner per se, like even if the fielder makes a sensational play, she might not get the runner because it's a fast runner. A lot of times, like if it's a backhanded play and it's a bobble, I'll kind of lean more towards a hit, especially it's a fast runner. I mean, if it's a slow runner, maybe the fielder could have still like knocked it down and thrown it to first to get the out. But generally how I kind of lean on it is, if it's a glove side play, like if the field, like just kind of keep into consideration how the fielder fielded the ball. If it's a backhanded play, if it's I consider backhanded plays a little bit tougher especially on the softball side of things, where you have to make a quick throw to first. If there's a slight bobble on a backhand, I kind of lean more toward a hit, but obviously we all have our own discretion on plays, but that's kind of generally speaking how I lean when it comes to hits and errors. One of the things to kind of keep an eye on, and maybe some of you guys have noticed this in games before, in softball, unlike box, they have something called illegal pitches. In that scenario, there's no like runner advances to second or anything like that. It just automatically gets entered as a ball. So you may all of a sudden like see umpire throw up a different count than what you have in your stats. A lot of times that may stem from they called an illegal pitch, which may have resulted in one of the pitches being an automatic ball instead of like a strike or any pitch at all. I know Denny may talk about this in a little bit more detail with baseball, but one of the things you kind of need to keep an eye on is how to determine a certain hit, whether it's a single, a double, or a triple. Um, Especially with softball too, because a lot of times you'll have runners on base. Let's say a runner at second, girl hits a ball to the outfield, and the outfielder's automatically trying to throw it home to get the out. I've seen some people rule this as a single and advance on the throw. I've seen some people labeled as a double. But you really need to take into consideration what the runner at first is doing on that particular play. Like I've had like quite a few like that land in the gap, and the batter, especially if the fast batter, they're trying to dig for second no matter what. Like they're trying to get a double no matter what, but the fielder's still maybe trying to get the out at home. Like that's a situation where I may lean toward a double. If it's like where I would label it as maybe a single and advance on a throw is if the runner rounds first and then freezes to wait to see what the fielder does. That's one where you would want to label it as a single and advance to second on the throw, which in Presto you would label as 1B space plus T. And one last situation I kind of just wanted to cover, and this is a really unique situation that I never encountered until last year. We played an away doubleheader. And this is just kind of like a general intervention by the SID if either the umpires or the teams kind of got something wrong. We had a runner at first, one out. Runner takes off and gets thrown out at second. Out is called. She's thrown out. There should be 2 outs, but both teams leave the field thinking there's 3 outs. The SID that was covering these games reached out to me and said, hey, what do I do? Because Presto, I only have 2 outs in Presto, and everybody thinks there's 3 outs and they're going to the next inning. He didn't know that he could go talk to the umpires and say, hey, look, there's only 2 outs. Both teams need to go back out there. It's not the end of the inning yet. So, but he didn't know that. He was trying to figure out a way to get the next batter out. And it's something that they ended up catching the very next inning. They're like, oh, wait a minute. We ended the last inning too early. So that's something to just kind of keep in mind if you do run into a really weird situation like that. I can honestly say I've been an SID for more than 10 years. That's the first time I think I've ever seen every team on the field not know how many outs there were. But if it is something that pops up, you can let the umpires know that, hey, there's only 2 outs. I don't know why everybody left the field, but that's something that you do have the authority to do if a situation like that does arise. So, but I won't take up any more time on softball unless we've got some questions, but that's some of the things I kind of wanted to discuss and some of the more common mistakes I do see in softball statting.
Appreciate that, Adam. We'll not call you off the field too quickly yet, but feel free to use the Q&A in the chat portion of your Zoom to ask Adam a question, throughout our conversation today. But we'll allow Denny to come out of the bullpen and, put himself in the position to help us out with some education on baseball.
Okay, I've never been a good reliever, but I'll give her a shot. I think I basically geared mine towards the newer scores, the new SIDs that might not have done a lot of baseball, because I know there's a lot of guys out there that've done it a long time. My first thing, and a lot of older guys and gals are going to say, what do you do that for? I think you should keep a score sheet. And the reason I say that is because so many different situations can come up where you have to maybe say, did this guy pinch hit already? You can look on the computer and it's pretty good, but sometimes it's kind of hard to figure out a different situations. And I've always kept a score sheet. It's not official. The book, I mean, it is kind of official, but we keep things obviously on our Presto now. But I would suggest that if you're just starting off, to learn how to keep a score sheet and have one there. You can tell when a pitcher comes in, just in case later in the game you're like, when did that guy come in? Well, if you have it on your score sheet, you can go back and you can edit it. The other thing I would say is before the game, check with the coaches or whatever, check numbers, make sure you got the right numbers and the rosters are correct. It comes seventh inning, here comes number 84. Who in the world's 84? No idea. Make up a name and then go back later and put in the right name. So check for rosters before the game. Game starts, look at your clock. I don't know why baseball, unlike any other sport, is so geared to how long a game lasts, but write down the starting time, write down the ending time, use the same, whether it's your phone or a clock or your watch or whatever, to start the game. And the last thing before I get into too many stats here is find somebody in your conference or around you that you can throw things off. Like over here, I'm in Idaho. I've got Sam Grist at Eastern Oregon. Weird things happen. And when I'm done here, I'll give you a Facebook page, which is great for different situations that we all throw things off. I've been here since 1977, and every game you're going to come up with something. You're going to look at somebody and go, how in the world do you score that? So don't feel like if something happens, you have no idea and you feel dumb, because things do happen. But to go on, to start off, I think, what do people look at? They look at, we have this WAR now and all these other stat numbers, but still that comes down to ERA and batting average. And that's why checking for errors, checking for hits are so important, I think, as far as what is a pitcher's earned run average. An earned run average is totally helping the pitcher out. Okay, should that guy have scored? A batting average is, what did you earn as a batter? You didn't earn that hit if you hit it right to a guy and he threw it over the first baseman's head. So it shows, it helps the pitcher. What does he earn? Helps the batter, shows their true batting averages. What can affect earned runs? Well, this is a tough one that people will argue. A foul ball is hit and a fielder is camped under it in foul territory. Third baseman, first baseman, sometimes even the catcher, and I'll get to that in a second. But if they're camped under a foul ball and they drop that foul ball, that is an error. People will say, well, how can that be an error? Don't you have to wait and see what the batter does? No. And the reason for that is, again, earned run average. If that guy survives a drop ball and he hits a home run and you don't give that guy an error, then it's an earned run. So it can be an error. Now, those are tough errors to give to catchers. They're tough errors to give to anybody who is running after a ball, trying to catch it around their, in the back of their head. Or, I mean, I'm talking, you're camped under there and the ball, you miss it. The wind doesn't blow it. You just blow it yourself. Catchers are a little different story. They got that catcher's glove. They can be camped under there, but it's pretty hard to give a catcher a drop foul ball, on a lot of situations, unless they're just there for quite a while waiting for it to come down. Another thing for new scorers is, why is it important to tell
Has Denny's screen froze for anyone else?
Yeah, he's froze for me too.
Okay. One of the things somebody brought, I'll see if I can let him know that his screen is froze, but one of the things someone shared with me in our question and answer is that when they've kept a manual score sheet, is they go back through and highlight the different color, like the inning of a relief pitcher. So like, for example, one pitcher would be in a blue highlighter and another pitcher would be in a yellow highlighter, just to keep track of what would be responsible for of that pitcher.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Now you're back.
Oh, okay. New Zoom guy. Anyway, difference between pass ball and wild pitch. Just quickly, you need to pay attention because a pass ball isn't charged to the pitchers as far as earned run average. If that guy does score because of the pass ball, he advances and eventually scores, and he wouldn't have if there was not a pass ball. Wild pitch is charged to the pitcher. So if you're on third, wild pitch, that's an earned run, considering everything else that went on that inning. Adam touched on sacrifices. One thing I ran into about 3 years ago, a team was giving a player a sacrifice fly if they just moved a runner up anywhere. And that kind of made my eyebrows go up. You have to score a guy on a sacrifice fly. You can score from second, a long sac fly, if you keep running, but you have to score a run on a sac fly. Fielder's choice, another tough one. There's a guy on base, a guy hits a grounder, the shortstop, second baseman, or whatever, and he could get you out as a batter, but he chooses to get another guy. That's why it's called fielder's choice. So the batter is charged with the fielder's choice. Now, if you think there's a guy on first and the ball's hit deep in a hole, and the guy shortstop has no way to get you at first, and he's just going to try to get a guy at second because that's the only thing he can do, but there's no way he's going to get him. You can give that batter a base hit, even though the guy threw it to second, because that's the only thing he could have done. He wasn't going to get you at first. He wasn't going to get the runner going to second. Adam talked on hits. Hits you can be camped under a hit. I once gave an infield double to a guy. Ball was popped up, pitcher's there, catcher's there, first baseman's there, but the wind blew it. They all jumped after it. Nothing they could do physically. The guy ended up on second base. You can get a hit for that. A lot of people say if a ball hits a glove, a mitt, that's an automatic error. No, a line shot off a guy's glove that he reacts quickly to, but he can't feel, that can be a hit. If a fielder dives after a ball, leaves his feet 9 out of 10 times, you can give that guy a hit. So being an official scorer, you determine your own, you make your own decisions on hits, errors, and things like that. And you have to keep aware of, basically, if the guy would have fielded the ball cleanly, would he have thrown the guy out? Okay, grounder the third, picks it up, bobbles it a couple of times, and the guy's safe at first. Would he have thrown him out if he hadn't bobbled it? Yeah, then that's an error. If it's hit to the third baseman and he goes to his left, he grabs it and tries to throw the guy out, and it gets stuck in his glove, a physical error, then that can be a base hit. He was going to make it. The guy didn't drop the ball. He didn't bobble it. He had trouble getting it out of his glove. And that's also to the scorer's discretion. One that's really tough, and you need to go email a guy who scored for quite a while. You'll see when you score, a run scores, it'll ask you if it's earned, unearned, or it's charged to the team. And you're like, what do you mean by that? Quickly, in a nutshell, if your team should have been out of an inning, let's say a pitcher starts the inning and he gets 3 guys get on by an error, okay, and they take that pitcher out. Well, your team should be out of that inning, okay? New pitcher comes in, gives up a home run. He doesn't get benefits of those 3 errors, and your team is not charged with those errors, but that new pitcher is, and that's what a team unearned run is. And that takes a whole chapter just to figure that out. But game-winning hits, if you can credit the batter with as many bases as the winning run scores if the batter touches those bases. And by that I mean tie ball game, runner on second, guy hits a gapper, guy scores and wins it, but the batter only reaches first, he doesn't go to second. That's an RBI single, game-winning single. Guy on first, guy hits it off the wall, guy scores from first. The guy that hits it, he's jumping up and down, he only touches first base. he only gets a single. If he wants to go all the way around and touch third base for whatever reason, he can get a triple because that's where the guy scored from first. Pitching errors are the same as a fielder's error. They don't get the benefit of, I'm a pitcher, I want to help my earned run average, I'm going to throw this ball into the outfield and let this guy get on. They're a fielder, doesn't matter. A pitcher's error is a fielding error. Winning and losing pitchers, that's another long category, but quickly. But to round it up is the winning pitcher in a game, in a 9-inning game, has to go at least 5 innings and leave with the lead. Okay. He can, if it only goes 7 innings, he only has to go 4 innings to get the win. In college baseball, you have a predetermined split a lot of times. If you know that before the game, you can give the win to the pitcher of record, meaning who's ever ahead if they win that game, when that pitcher's out. Now, predetermined split to me is not like first guy goes 3, second guy goes 3. Now we're going to go 1 in the third, 2 in the third. It's got to be, hey, these 3 guys are going to pitch this many innings. If a guy that's supposed to pitch 3 innings starts and only goes 2 in the third innings because he doesn't do good, then he's not going to get credit for the win. He didn't do the predetermined split. So there's a lot of weird things in baseball like that. And just, you can't get the win and a save. I had a high school coach call me one time. He had a kind of a Shohei Ohtani situation. He had a starter pitcher who came in. He left. They put him in the outfield with his team ahead in the 8th inning, like 1-0 or whatever, and then put in a new pitcher. And then they brought that guy back in to save the game. And he goes, can that guy get a win and a save? No, you can't get a win and a save. You can get either or. If there is a save situation, somebody has to get the win, somebody has to get the save. So winning and losing pitchers are another one to look up. I would suggest, I could go on and on scoring things, but I would suggest you get somebody close to you to throw things off. Also, the Facebook page I was talking about is called, and I would write this down because there's some very, very intelligent, smart scorers out there. It's called SID, Scoring Assistance. And that's where we throw things off like, hey, you won't believe what happened here. The guy from second went backwards and the guy passed him, and, who do you give the hit to and all that. So that's a good one to go to for situations that you might have. Go ahead and put your situation on there. And the other thing, for new scorers, I would Google tough scoring situations or things that have happened. Sometimes I just hit MLB scoring situations, and they have examples of things that happen, and you can work your way through it. A guy bats out of order and things like that. But the main thing is you are the official scorer. If you think it's a hit, it's a hit. You can be talked out of it if a guy says, oh, didn't you see him? He tripped over a rock or something. Things you don't see. You don't have to be, ignorant about it and stick to your guns just because you made a call. You can always, consider what other people are saying, but you have to make the determination. And in the end, you're determining a pitcher's earned run average and a batter's batting average, the winning and losing pitchers, and who gets the save.
Appreciate that, Denny. And, as we continue, feel free to put questions into the Q&A, and maybe, Adam will be able to answer some for you. Denny will be able to, and then we'll also take some here to the group. One of the questions that was posed was helping determining wins and losses, very similar with baseball and softball. So Denny, thanks for that insight. And now we'll turn it over to Sean and Nick to talk to us about making sure you're set up before you even get to, like Denny talked about, doing a paper book, but obviously in this day and age where we're also doing computer stats, making sure how you can use Presto to, be effective in your day-to-day operations. So I'll have Sean and Nick go.
All right. So I'm sharing my screen right now. I'm going to go through a quick presentation, just a few slides here, just kind of the the initial setup and how you manage your rosters, your schedules, and once you get into the stats entry platform, what some of the best practices to use. All right. As far as your roster management goes, there's one thing I do want to point out right off the bat. If you do have a Presto website, you're going to want to be in the BIOS roster when you're making your edits to your roster. This will allow your edits to be visible on the front end of your website, but it'll also update your shared roster at the same time. If you just update your shared roster, it is not going to impact your visible roster on the front end of your website. So if you are using a Presto website and doing stats, make sure you're in the BIOS roster for your website. For the non-Presto website users, continue to use the shared roster, and it still updates through our network via the shared roster. This presentation will get sent out to everybody on the call today is in a follow-up email, and along with the this presentation on the website. But there's a helpful link there if you're not sure on what to do as far as BIOS rosters versus shared rosters. And in the rosters, you can obviously update their, height, weight, bat, throw, stuff like that, but also make them active and inactive. Once you open the game, you're gonna want to make sure you're checking the box for all the you're putting in your starting lineup for the game. Receive those lineups from the coaches prior to the game. One thing I always like to do as an SID, it was just usually going to have a lineup card, assuming that the coaches all have their stuff together. You should have a nice lineup card with the lineup listed with their position, and then also all of the other players that could go into the game along with their numbers listed there at the bottom. I always just go over to the coach and said, hey, is everything on this accurate? Or has anybody's numbers changed? That way you can kind of get ahead of it before the game starts. If somebody does have a different jersey on that day. So once you have your lineups in there, you'll be able to go ahead and start the game. As far as adding the game into the schedule, you'll make sure you're putting all your information when you're adding in the games in your season. So for this one here, within the NAI baseball season, you want to make sure you're adding the team to the game. So for Missouri Baptist and the Masters, make sure their logo's popping up, their RPI's attached to it, and you're clicking on that correct team. If the team is not within your season, you can still add the game. But just remember that if you're playing, say, an NCAA school and within your NAI season, their roster that's in the NCAA season is not going to populate into the NAI season. So you will need to receive that roster from the opposing school ahead of time. Just get the packed roster file, then you can import that into the game once you have the game open. But as long as you do have the teams selected to the game, the stats will populate to both schedules once the game is completed and during, as well as the links associated with for prime time. Also on this page, you can add it if it is a neutral site game. Just make sure you're putting in the neutral site information that'll mark the game as a neutral site game. If you're using live stats through Presto, make sure you click the primetime button. That'll generate the live stat link to allow it to be displayed on your website and across our network. Once the game's been concluded, you can send off you can email off the files, the packed file, the XML, and the PDF through the portal here. You can also do this from the event page within the game day and CMS. You choose from your contact list to be able to send those out. You can send these out to the opposing SID. You can check the box for all three, or you can have just the packed file, the PDF, or the XML sent out from there as well. And again, if it's an NAI versus NAI game and they're using Presto, you don't necessarily need to send them out, but because they're already going to be in the network on their schedule. And the cheat sheets. We have a couple different sheets here for you. The first cheat sheet is going to have you input keys on it. It's going to have a little bit of information there at the top, what to do before the game, after each half inning, ending the game, and then the offline mode. But also the input keys for the batters and the special keys off to the right there. The other page here is the sample plays. While it doesn't encompass every nuanced play that could possibly come up, most of your standard plays and things that will come up during most seasons are listed there in the sample plays and what to do in those situations. The one thing I did want to mention I don't have here on the slide is after each half inning, you're going to have a window pop up a couple different windows that could pop up, but one is going to pop up that says the runs, the hits, and the errors in that inning. I always like to utilize that for my PA announcer. So if you are sitting near your PA announcer, you can relay that information pretty quickly over to them. Just say 4-2 and 4-2-1, and they'll know what to do with that information to broadcast over the PA. It's just a helpful thing to remember. Also, if you do have a pinch runner or a pinch hitter in there and they haven't been assigned a position on the field, it's not going to let you move on to the next half inning. So it keeps you it prevents you from making those mistakes by having a player in there without a position. So you will have to correct that before you go into the next inning, but it'll warn you before you can move on. All right. That's all I have.
Was there anything you wanted to add to that, Sean, from your end as well?
No, I don't have anything else to add.
We've had a couple people ask in the chat about just when you hit to an extra innings, how would you enter that into the stat program? So I'll either Adam, you want to tackle that since it's a common occurrence in the softball instance.
Sorry, could you repeat that? I was in the middle of
But just
answering
like
that.
how you know, for example, in extra innings in softball, you automatically place a runner at second base. I think it was answered in the chat, but not for those that may have missed that.
Yeah, so I did answer that in the chat. If you do have softball and an international tiebreaker rule, what happens is let's say you're entering the top of the eighth. The last batter that batted in the top of the seventh would be the runner that gets put on second base. So whenever you're entering that in Presto, when you're going into the top of the eighth, you put in the batter section R:, the number of the batter in the order. So if it's like the number 3 batter, you would put 3 and then comma 2. That'll put that batter on second base. So that's kind of how you would engage the international tiebreaker rule if you have it.
And then another question that's been posed in the chat, and it's, you know, it happens a lot more in baseball than possibly softball. So I'll turn this question over to you, Denny. How do you determine when to give an error on a foul ball? Like when a fielder makes a misjudgment.
Right. Yeah, I kind of touched on that a little bit. It comes down to, I've always said if they're camped under it, in other words, they're there, they're not running after it, they're not catching it behind their back, they're camped under it, and it drops out of their glove. You can't give an error on a guy that's jumped up on top of the dugout and tried to catch it, or leaped after it, or something like that. But I think it comes down to the fact if it was in the field and he drops it, you're going to give him an error. If it's a foul ball and he's right there, you can give him an error. And the other, I touched on catchers. They can get a drop foul ball error too, but again, they're a little different. They got to take their mask off. They got to find the ball. They got to get to it. They got to get camped under it, and it's got to be up there pretty high for them to be steady. So that's how I determine errors on foul balls, is if it should have been caught without extraordinary, effort.
Denny talked about the SID Scoring Assistance Facebook group. There's also, it was shared with me as the moderator, there's a Twitter account or X account called Scoring Changes. That is a good way to find out, how other scorers are reviewing plays and best practices for your development. And then each year at the CSE Unite or convention, there is stat dugouts where you can, meet other scorers. Like Denny talked about his relationship with Sam at Eastern Oregon, a good person to bounce things off of. So, the nice thing is with YouTube, you can always pull up what I do when I'm training somebody is pull up a game on YouTube and simulate putting that into the stat program to learn, different things on how to put in substitutions. And obviously that, those are replayed or revisited games and learn how different things were scored from the standpoint. But feel free to populate within the Q&A if you have other questions you would like to see answered. But Nick, you talked a little bit about from the Presto standpoint, making sure what you had talked about if you don't have the roster, is there any certain best practices you have or suggest to prepare, like when you don't have an active roster from an opponent?
If you don't have an active roster from an opponent, that can be you're talking about like an NAI school playing an NCAA school and the
Yeah.
roster's not being in there.
just
Just make sure
college.
you're reaching out. Make sure you're reaching out well ahead of time. If you know you're going to be playing a school that's not within the NAI season, reach out ahead of time. Make sure you're getting their roster. Make sure it's an active roster when they send it over. When you go to import it, you'll know because it won't let you put it in if it's got more than 40 players on it. If it does come to a situation where you don't have an active roster or it's got too many players on it, what I would do in that case is I would simply put the players in one by one as I need them. So you get your starting lineup, your first 10 that are going in the game, and then as you need to put players in, I would put them in manually, just to avoid having too big of a roster and not being able to import it, but also just make sure you don't give participation to somebody who's not there or not playing. It just makes it a little bit easier, and it's a little bit of a pain up front, but once you get into the game, it doesn't take a ton of time to add a player to the roster, then put him in the game. So you'll have that list from the coach on your lineup card. You should at least, but just make sure you have that to the side when you're doing it that way. But that's kind of how I always manage that situation because I've run into those situations too.
I'm at an institution currently where we have 64 baseball players, but we won't have an active roster prior to each game from that standpoint. So deciding how do I make that, 8th string catcher? Why do I have him even listed on there? But also I have to make sure he's available. So when we go to that neutral site contest that, we have a number unique to him or an identity specific to him.
Right.
So Adam, talk about how, like, for example, if a situation where a coach knows that their pitcher is not going to bat, but they put them in the batting lineup, for example. Does that make sense to you? What I'm talking about is, like, for example, I know my pitcher is listed on the lineup card as number 7, but she's not going to bat there. They're going to put in somebody else. How do you know when that designated player comes into play? Does that make sense to you?
So when you're saying when they turned in the lineup card, they had the pitcher in the order where the DP would be, or is that what you're asking?
Right. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting one. I'm trying to jog my memory on how to enter that. I believe what I've done is when that particular order comes up to bat, I will do a double switch with the extra fielder. Because they'll usually list a designated fielder in the number 10 position. When that order comes up, I'll usually do the double switch and basically put that fielder who's actually batting, I guess, in that part of the order and put the pitcher in their normal, 10 spot, so to speak. So just usually doing the traditional double switch in that regard.
And then, Denny, you get the fortune of being at the World Series every year. You have a lot of neutral site games. Obviously, from the standpoint home and visitor, sometimes, some schools work where, like, the second game of a doubleheader, the roles are reversed, even though they are still playing at. How do you make sure, how do you prepare yourself for those kind of situations, like dictating who's home and away from that standpoint? What's your best solution or suggestion to get that feedback?
You mean how to input it in the computer or in Presto?
Yeah.
Yeah, Presto has a pull down option where it'll ask you if home team is batting first, or I forget how they word it, but in the old days it used to be you would put the letter H in there for the home team batting first, but there's a drop down on the menu if you like, say Lewis Clark State in Lewiston is playing somebody, but they're the visiting team, then you would pull a drop down and it would say the home team is batting first or something to that effect. But Presto has a way to handle that when you set up the game.
One of the comments provided in the chat, going back to my previous question of asking, a rule of thumb is just to have that communication with the coaches to know if they are going to flip the designated player in the flex position, because that way your pitcher does get credited for a game started, and instead of coming in as a reliever or from that standpoint, and then the player will be having the correct stats for their efforts. But feel free to, ask other questions, other questions. One of the other questions was about if when a ball is hit into fair territory and then goes into foul territory, how are you determining when that's a hit or an error? So Adam, if you want to kind of explain to our audience a little bit about, how you came up with how you would score that.
Hey, Danny, I actually had one question in the chat that I actually like to ask Presto, because I was going to answer it, but Presto may be able to answer this. Josh Pound asked, like, let's say there's a double that's hit and the runner, like, they may be thinking about going to third and realize they can't get there and they try to go back to second and they get thrown out. I know for me in the past, what I was going to explain to him is what I've done is I've entered the double first, and then with the runner at second, I'll enter the putouts. But is there a way in Presto to enter both that double and the throw out on the return to second?
Yeah, Nick, I can take this one. So for that, everything that I've seen with that, obviously it's not a super common situation, but so yeah, just exactly the way you explained it would be, as far as I know how you would input it, is you would put in the hit first, a space, and then you would put in the put out. So like say, they made it the second base safely, they were going for third, and then went back and got thrown out at second. So you'd put like 2B space and then put the put out. So like say went to like third baseman and then shortstop. So you'd put in 5-6, so 2B space 5-6, so that's going to credit that batter with the hit, and then also credit the put out and then the out on that play as well. So it's going to include all that into that same play.
Adam, are you talking about the runner that was already on second getting thrown out?
I think, let me double check his message here.
Yeah, I guess the way I saw it said it when they hit a double, realize they can't make it, so I'm saying make it past second base. Okay, yeah, Josh said yes. So yeah, it sounds like he's talking about it because he was mentioning how in DAC stats there was like a return the bag thing that you could click. We don't have a input like that in Presto. It's basically you just putting in that hit, putting the hit, a space, and then the put out. So it's going to credit the hit and then also credit the put out and the out on that play as well.
Okay, sorry to interject on your question, Danny. Could you repeat that? I just wanted to get an answer from Presto on that, since I wasn't 100% sure as well on how to answer that.
I think I was more referring to just the whole idea of just keeping in communication when you have like a player that has, when a ball is hit in fair territory, and then it makes its way into foul territory, how you are making that judgment to either give a hit or an error on that, how that is ruled in from your standpoint.
Yeah, there was a question asked in the chat, and I'm glad there was some clarification put on it, because it does kind of depend on where the fielder is at, if they're playing back or if they're playing up. So let's say if the third baseman is, like there's like maybe a slapper that they're playing up at third, or knowing they have to try to get a quick out at home, so they're playing up. There's a sharp grounder or sharp liner hit toward third, gets knocked down and goes into foul territory. Since the fielder's playing up and it's a very challenging play to make, that's one where I would lean toward a hit. If the third baseman's playing back toward the bag or behind the bag and they just completely misplayed it, obviously that's one I'd lean more toward an error. So it's kind of just dependent on where the fielder's at in the field of play when that particular play happens. Because like I said, if they're playing up trying to get, like a slapper or someone like that, and they just all of a sudden just whale one down the third baseline, that's a very challenging play for the fielder to make. So that's just one thing to kind of keep into consideration.
I've also seen line shots go off a pitcher's leg, and they'll go into foul territory, and that's a base hit. If it hits an infielder and then goes into foul territory, it can be a base hit if they're standing in fair territory.
Appreciate the feedback there, gentlemen. Well, obviously a lot of great information. Just so you know, if the scoring book that the NCAA produces has a lot of, nuances on showing you how to, put things in from a standpoint of like understanding what constitutes a hit, what constitutes an error, like keeping track of runs batted in, all very important statistics for our student athletes that they can, accumulate. One of the things I've been made aware of is that there's like a case book that talks about certain situations on how you would put that into your, from a scoring standpoint. But I support Denny's idea of keeping it like a paper book, because you can go back and change it sometimes easier on paper, or see how the inning is populating before rushing to put it into the computer from that standpoint. But I'll let Adam, if you want to tackle briefly about just the whole idea of the differences of double plays, like running into a double play, or just the difference where you would use GDP versus DP, and from a softball standpoint, and then I'll turn it over to Denny to see if, how he interprets it from a baseball standpoint.
Sure. Most of the time when you get double plays with softball, it will be typically a ground into double plays, like a 6-4-3 or something along the lines. Whenever you're entering that sort of double play, you'll want to enter the 6-4-3 GDP, but you'll occasionally sometimes have, let's say, a runner at third, fly ball to left, and left fielder fields it and throws out the runner at home. That's a situation where you'll want to put a 7-2 DP and an X on the runner at third. That's sort of a situation where you want to put when you enter that, it'll say in the play-by-play hit into a double play. Or if you're putting F, that would be if you put F 7-2, it'll say flied into a double play. And same situations where if it's a line drive, where it's like, let's say, runner at first, batter hits a liner down the first baseline, first baseman snares it and steps on the bag quickly. You can do, L3 DP, that'll say lined into double play, and then an X on the runner. Let's see, what are a few other situations? Generally speaking, those are the most double plays you'll run into, but yeah, whenever you do want to kind of differentiate between a grounded into a double play and whether it's a fly or a line into a double play, you want to differentiate between those two.
Did you have anything you'd like to add to that, Denny?
Yeah, I think just the basic determination. It's called ground into double play. So it's basically usually a 6-4-3, 4-6-3. You ground into a double play. The play is not broken. It's a continuation. In other words, bing bang. It's not like I got a guy at second. Oh, there goes the guy breaking for home. You're not grounding into a double play. And the reason we differentiate is between GDP and just DP is it generates a stat. One of those stats where it shows how many times did this batter actually ground into a double play, and how many double plays a team actually turned one way or another. So yeah, basically the term ground into double play, it's bang bang, you hit the ball, 2 outs are made, nothing happened in between. No no play happened where you run after another runner or something like that.
Appreciate that. And with that, I think we'll wrap up today's, obviously we could talk about different plays, different situations, for ad nauseum, but I appreciate Adam and Denny giving us some feedback on softball and baseball, but also Sean and Nick sharing with us on how to utilize Presto effectively as we enter our baseball, softball season. We'd like to thank them for their contributions to our discussion and our insights on best practices in handling baseball and softball stats. There's various stat rules. As Denny talked about, the Facebook group is a very good way to get feedback. Obviously there's people all on there that will give you that have done scoring at all levels, all the way up to Major League Baseball, and Denny's involved with the World Series. So, you're going to get a lot of great input and great insights, and a good way to interact with our colleagues to allow our student athletes to receive and earn the appropriate statistics. Also, we encourage you to check out the COSIDA or the College Sports Communicators website there and follow up today's webinar. There will be some tip sheets that came from various audiences that will help you with best practices. But also the website's going to have some latest and new information for you about upcoming webinars and membership news. We thank you for your time today and look forward to having and seeing many of you at the CSC Unite this spring. So thank you.